In a few days, Pope Francis will finally arrive in local shores, putting an end to a period of preparations that lasted for months. At the Vatican, however, crunch time is just beginning. Our chief correspondent, Pia Hontiveros, is there, and here's part one of her story.
In the last few days, there has been much excitement here in the Vatican for the Pope's visit there and to Sri Lanka. And there has been much preparation too, especially for a contingent of 70 journalists who will be flying with Pope Francis to Colombo, Manila, and Tacloban. Journalists, 14 of us Filipinos, 8 of us from 4 networks, including my cameraman and me, and the rest from a broadsheet from 2 Catholic news organizations and Radio Television Malacanang. This is the first time Filipino journalists will be on board a papal flight. On Saturday morning, the Vatican press office distributed all our passes to board the papal flights and work programs for the visits, guides for us journalists, and our plane tickets came from a travel agency assigned by the Vatican. Now, earlier, Alan Holdren, EWTN and CNA's bureau chief here in Rome, was invited by Father Greg Gaston to the Colegio Filipino to brief us Filipino journalists about what it's going to be like on the papal plane and what covering the Pope is like on a trip. Holdren has been on 3 papal trips, 2 of them with Benedict XVI and 1 with Pope Francis to South Korea in August. And he'll be coming along this trip to Sri Lanka and the Philippines. The Pope, Holdren says, always sits at the very front row, and you'll know it's him because you can spot the white skull cap from the back of the cabin. And at least on the last trip Holdren was on, there is an image of the Virgin Mary hanging right in front of the Pope. The Pope always greets all the journalists on board the papal flight, and he means all, including all the TV cameramen. That moment when the Pope greets each one of us could be anywhere between 15 seconds to a few minutes. On the trip back from South Korea, Holdren says he gave the Pope a letter from a priest friend of his. The letter had the priest's cell phone number on it. The Pope called the priest. The in-flight press conferences Pope Francis is so fond of giving could take anywhere between 15 minutes to under an hour, but that depends entirely on the Pope. He takes about 15 questions. There's an agreement beforehand among the journalists about who will be asking the questions, and there are groups. So on this trip, there are questions from Filipino journalists, the English language group, Spanish, French, German. The Pope can be asked questions in English. He answers in Italian. Translation is made available at the end of the flight. There is an embargo for about perhaps an hour till after the plane touches down. No, not even a tweet or a Facebook post can break that embargo. The radio journalists will be seated very near to where the Pope will stand for the press conference. Yes, he remains standing all throughout. Cameramen and photographers will be seated by the windows. We will have clean audio. Our cables can be plugged into the plane system for that. Of course, the video you see is what we call file video. The papal flight to Colombo leaves Rome this Monday evening. That will be in Manila time, the early morning hours of Tuesday, January 13. We get on the plane before he does and get off the plane before he does. He never waits for us. We wait for him. It's going to be a very hectic schedule with the Pope, his delegation, and us, the media, jumping from one event to another. Now, Holdren spoke also about this energizer battery of a Pope.
Pope Francis doesn't seem to rest. He just keeps on going. And it's incredible because you'll find that in the moments that you think, you must be resting, you hear later that he was doing something during it. He was baptizing someone, or he was visiting with the Jesuits in that area. He fills what you think are blank spaces with other events. He's always on the move. He must sleep between 4 and 5 hours a night, even while he's here in Rome. And he just keeps on going. It's incredible. I ask myself the same thing with Benedict XVI, because imagine a man of 83, 84 years old who's on a trip, seeing different people, giving speeches in his 4th language, trying to put forth the best effort. And it seemed like the energy, I mean, it's a divine mission that these popes are on. You cannot do that job if not for the grace of God. It's impossible. These guys, they need, this is why Pope Francis asks for prayers, I'm convinced, because that's his energy source, it seems. He just keeps on going and going. And you ask yourself, is this physically, humanly possible for a man of his age? And it seems to be. He's been doing it for a year and a half.